For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome.
Thank you.
It is reported that officials charged with flouting procedures in the Nkandla scandal may try to subpoena President Jacob Zuma. How do you understand this?
I believe these hearings are being held in Durban, and the officials say that this Special Investigation Unit, SIU, actually investigated their accounts and all sorts of things, something that the public protector didn't even do. And what I think is happening is that the responsibility for everything that has happened is being shifted onto the shoulders of other people, other than the person who actually benefited. And I think it raises a quite interesting question about leadership and responsibility. And it's interesting to look back at ANC history. In 1969, the ANC had a conference in Morogoro in Tanzania, which is quite a famous conference. At that time, there was a lot of demoralization. There had been the campaigns into then Rhodesia in Wenki and Sipulilo, and people were very unhappy. Some of them felt that too much time was spent on diplomacy and not enough time in trying to facilitate military action. And Chris Hani was one of those who prepared a memorandum complaining about the leadership, and it's well known that he was almost sentenced to death. But the response of Tambo as the acting president to this level of dissatisfaction with the leadership was not merely to say whatever was done by the leadership as a whole. He offered his own resignation because he felt that he as the leader must take responsibility even though he was part of a collective. And I think it's very important that if you are a leader and something has gone wrong, even if you do not directly benefit, you take some measure of responsibility. And in the case of benefiting financially or in terms of physical improvements, as happened in Nkandla, you must take responsibility for that, and you cannot shift it to someone else. I mean, the idea of shifting doesn't even arise in most democracies. The leader offers his or her resignation. Now, what's happened here is that there have been, I think, at least 3 ministers of public works since Zuma became president. Ministers are shuffled out, deputy ministers are shuffled out, and they are being held responsible for this, directors general and others. And a similar thing happened with the landing of the Guptas at the airport. Now, if we ask who would derive benefit from flouting the rules, would any of these officials who were charged for flouting the rules, did they have any reason to assist the Guptas? Now, the only people who had connections with the Guptas were members of the government and the president himself. Now, instead, Kolwane and this colonel were charged, amongst others. And Kolwane was, I think he was suspended from his position. But later, he was appointed to a diplomatic post. Now, if you have done something disgraceful, which he is alleged to have done, why are you rewarded with a diplomatic post? Now, it's not the first time it has happened, because Ibrahim Rasool in Cape Town was implicated in paying money to journalists to give favourable coverage to himself. He was given probably the top diplomatic post in the world, possibly that one in the UN, or the top diplomatic post. He's ambassador to the United States. So it's not the first time that it's happened, but I think what we see from this is leadership examples are that other members of the leadership shield Zuma, and Zuma thinks first of shielding himself, and people who help him are not protected. They're dumped very often when he's used them enough.
What do you think of the argument that Zuma should not be held responsible for that which he did not request?
Well, Matole Motshekga, who's got a doctorate in law, gave a pseudo-legal argument to this committee on Nkandla, which is now purely almost entirely an ANC committee. And he said, if you go to the ATM and you ask for 1,000, they give you 100,000, it's not your fault. But that is no answer, because if you get 100,000, it's your responsibility to hand it back, because there is a law which he knows of called unjust enrichment. If you have been improperly enriched, you are not entitled to pocket that which has benefited you. Now, in the case of Nkandla, Zuma is sitting at his country home. Now, I know the type of village that Nkandla is. It doesn't have lots of facilities that you will get in the city. So it costs much more to do things like air conditioning, swimming pools, things like this. It's much more difficult than to do it in Durban. Now you sit there and you see all these things happening around you. Now, Zuma is a person who's quite alert to things that benefit him and things that endanger him. And surely you make an observation if it's not what you want. Clearly, what he saw pleased him, and he didn't do something about it. And it seems to me that it is what people tend to do, if it is claimed that people drop the name of the president or they do what they think he likes, if you are aware of that, you actually indicate to people that this is not what you want. You don't encourage that type of conduct. I remember when I was in Sweden as ambassador, an advance party came along when President Mbeki was going to be there, and he who had been the king of Sweden had put a palace at their disposal. The advance party came in and said, this is not good enough. So I said, I'm very sorry. The king has given this to you for the president, and you can't go back to the king and say it's not good enough. What exactly is the problem? So they say there's not even a lift, there's just stairs. So I said, is there anyone in the party who's got who's physically challenged? They said no. So I said, well, look, I will take responsibility for it, and I'm not prepared to tell the king that this is not available. Now, what I think they were doing is assuming that what the president would want is more luxurious than was offered. And that would have been quite improper. Although I was not the world's greatest ambassador, but I did know certain things. And Mbeki never said a word, about it being problematic. But people do things which they think you will want. So a lot of things done on Mbeki's behalf went beyond what he required. Now, someone ought to have said, no, this is wrong, or gone to Mbeki if they wouldn't listen. So I think in this case, the president must have seen what was being done, it was up to him to say no.
Well, thank you very much for your insight. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about leadership and responsibility.